So Kyle, we started a podcast.
Yes.
Because what the world really needed was another podcast.
Yeah. We're the millionth podcast.
Everyone and their mom has a podcast now, but why did we start this podcast?
Partially it's pastors and pour overs. So we love coffee and we love theology, and we tend to talk about that when we're at work and just generally in life. Our conversations go around coffee and theology, and they tend to go together as well. You can't do good theology if you don't have good coffee, right? So I think one of the main reasons is just an outlet to talk about things we're passionate about. Also just to have conversations as well. I don't know. I think when we were talking about it, we want it to be more of a conversation than like a teaching thing, because you can go and find way better teachers than us. But to have conversations around important topics that matter.
Yeah. I found there'll be times where I'm having a theological conversation with someone, and there's other people in the room that are kind of just sitting there quietly, and I'm like, do you guys want us to change topics?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh no, we're learning. And I find a lot of people they want to know more than what they get from like the sermon format, a Sunday morning sermon. Not that we don't love those things. We think sermons are absolutely essential, but there's something to be learned from conversations and having conversations and just listening in or joining in when appropriate in a conversation. Like we can go deeper on some topics and we can learn more. And I think it's an opportunity for people to learn the details and the sort of background and foundations of what it is that they believe.
Yeah, exactly.
So on that note, well, let's start with the coffee. What are we drinking today?
Well, today, Cody, what we've got this is an Ethiopian coffee. It's from Harkin Coffee. If you're watching the video on YouTube, you can see the really cool packaging. But Harkin they're a fairly new roaster. The person who's roasting, as far as I know, definitely isn't new to the game. But they're in Vancouver. They opened, I think, last year in 2020. If not just the year before, but really good. Comes in these really cool boxes. I picked it up like yesterday. Had one last night and then today as well. It's really good. They have a lot of information on here too, which is cool. So, what you're supposed to be tasting, Cody? Classic black tea forward. Ethiopian with a lush body. We noticed ripe raspberries, macadamia nut, and peach. So. There you go.
Interesting.
Something to guide you in your drink today.
Yeah,
I did it with a Chemex as well. So
yeah, I can tell the black tea taste, I think, is most prominent to me. Tasting notes always name like specific fruits. They're like, it tastes like a stone fruit, or it's like a mango from Australia, and I'm like, yeah, it tastes like fruit.
Yeah,
Well,
we should talk about tasting notes sometime.
Yeah,
but we've got more important things to talk about.
Yeah, so today we're talking about the church, and more specifically, what is the church?
Yeah, I think when we were talking about starting a podcast and going through some topics and stuff, the church is kind of our starting point, because it's what we're a part of. It's what we're passionate about. And it kind of sets the stage for all other topics that we'll end up talking about, even ones we haven't planned yet. So do you want me to start us off here? I have a nice definition.
Yeah, give us your definition.
Okay. One of the things, if you're a fellow theology nerd, that you find yourself doing is you just start writing down like notes on your phone or something, and of potential like topics or ideas or posts. I don't know if you do that, but one that I've been thinking about for a while is the church. So I wrote a definition down. I'm sure there's better definitions, but basically at its core, here's what I've kind of put out is the local church is a body of believers in Jesus Christ who regularly gather to worship God and scatter to proclaim his gospel. What do you think?
That's good. Yeah. That's it's sort of it's one of those things where there's probably other ways you could word it, but it hits like every point that needs to be hit. And I think every good definition of what the church is will hit these same points. And I guess what kind of comes out of that is we're saying what is the church, but really the question is more who is the church?
Right.
So that very first statement there, it's the local body of believers. So it's not an event, it's not a place, which I feel like I hope most people know at this point. I see teachings on that a lot, like the church isn't just a building, and that I think that seemed really profound at one point in my life, and now I see it pretty regularly.
Well, it's almost coming off of like the 80s, 90s kind of church where it was like evangelistic events, right? You have the Billy Graham era, and it's like, come on out to church, and that's how we're going to get our friends saved and stuff. So I think then we started pushing back and it's like, okay, it's not just a building, it's not just an event. I had to redefine it, so.
Yeah, the church is a people, and it's specifically believers. We're people that what we have in common isn't just, a love of coffee. It's not a book club. It's not a bunch of people that come to an event, but we know that we have this shared identity and that we're believers. We're children of God. We're people who have come into the covenant. We're putting our faith in Jesus, and that makes it something that's very unique, unlike, going to a movie or going to a concert or even a conference. Like other places you go, like there might be people there that have absolutely nothing in common with you, sort of this assortment, whereas is the church, we're united and that we're all putting our faith in Jesus. We all believe the same thing.
Yeah, and that whole idea of being a body is so key to how we view like even ourselves in the church, I think, as well. We see Paul talk about being a body and being different parts of the body, but you have all that same focus like you have, right? So like, you think of just the analogy of the body, right? You have some who are legs and hands and arms and some, all the different parts of the body that go into it. And it says Christ is our head, right? Christ is the head of the church. He's the one who is guiding us and leading us in all things. So the analogy of the body is like really, I've always found it to be really profound and just really important in, as far as seeing my part within the church.
And it plays well with sort of the second part of your definition. The local church is a body of believers in Jesus Christ who regularly gather. And that gathering is such a crucial part to actually being the church. I think often when we talk about, the church is the people, we'll say like, well, it's not just on Sundays. Church is you and all of life. It's people in all of life. It's you are being the church when you're at work, but it's really the gathering that makes us the church. It's not something you do as an individual.
Right.
And then, I've seen a lot of this sort of, it's just me and Jesus mentality. Like all I need is me and Jesus. But really what the word church, it comes from ecclesia originally, which means assembly.
Yeah.
Like our English word church comes from, I can't actually remember the origin, but another word that means house of God. So like it's not even a good translation to go from ecclesia to church, but it very literally means assembly. Like when Jesus says, on this rock I will build my church, he's saying on this rock I will build my assembly, my gathering of people. And I believe maybe you can correct me, but I believe the term for assembly is something that would have been understood as being like an authoritative body, like a assembly for a purpose to kind of like, I think of like a board of a business, how the individual board members don't really have authority, but when they gather as the board, they have board authority. They can make decisions, they can make things happen. And it's when we come together as the body of the church that we have church authority.
Well, and Jesus tells us to use that authority as well, right? When he talks about whatever you bind on this earth will be bound in heaven. Like he's giving specific authority to the church in the way it acts as well. And I think we've planned to do some podcasts about kind of church structure and more of that kind of thing, like how things work out and everything. But yeah, this idea of assembling together, and you have this like structure to it where you have like elders, you have deacons, you have, church members and everything. Everyone playing their role, but all together as one, right? No one's greater than the other. Even when Paul talks to the elders, he says, "You're not lording it over the sheep, but you're shepherding them out of a love for them." It made me think of Hebrews 10, verse 23, which says, "Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds, not forsaking our own assembling together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." And that just idea of don't forsake the assembling together. You talked about the kind of lone wolf kind of attitude that we can have sometimes. And the writer of Hebrews is going right at that and saying, don't forsake the assembling together. And the reason for that is that's how you're going to hold fast to your confession of hope. So Jesus has formed his assembly, right, his ecclesia, for the purpose that we can spurn one another on to love and good deeds, to encourage one another every single day, and to help each other in this kind of walk of faith that we're in. And you see just the incredible importance of the assembly.
Yeah, I wanted to share, Jonathan Lehman uses the illustration of a team. I think he says a basketball team or a football team maybe. I probably changed it to basketball team because I like basketball. And he says, a team, there's still a team. Like you're still one of the Chicago Bulls, even if you're not gathered, if you're not playing, you're still part of the team. But if the team never comes together to play, they're never a team. And so we're still the church in our dispersion, but if we don't regularly gather, we're not really a church. And I think that's the coming together and building each other up. The Ephesians 4 talks about building each other up into Christ, who's the head, building one another up in unity. And I think it's so important to our worship and to how we proclaim the gospel. I know in John 17, the high priestly prayer, sort of the last things that Jesus is thinking about before he goes to die. And I know I've preached on this passage, and I talk about what would be the last thing on your mind before you die? Would you think of your family? Would you think of, oh man, I didn't get to see, the Canucks win a Stanley Cup, whatever it is. No, you don't care about the Canucks, I know.
At least they're just as bad, but
yeah, that's fair. But the last things on Jesus' mind, or one of them is the unity of the church, and he says that he wants us to be united, as he and the Father are united, so that we'd be united to them, and then that's how the world would know that it's legit. That's how the world would know that Jesus was in fact sent by God, by the way that we're unified as a body.
Yeah. And that's really, the message of the gospel is what sets the church apart from any other team or assembly. But also the unity that comes from that is something that people can see and actually see as a difference in that assembly, or they should at least, right? The unity that comes knowing that we are all sinners forgiven by God and part of his people, that gives us, I preached this morning, right? Forgive others. Jesus calls us to pray and ask for forgiveness as we forgive others as well, right? So this attitude of forgiveness, which is also an attitude of unity as well, not holding things against other people in the assembly. I think when you have a church that is really dedicated to those things and dedicated to that type of unity, people see the difference in it. They see the attitude of it. I think also one thing we should specify is we're talking about the local church here, because we have the church local and the church global and universal. And so we're talking about this. Obviously, every Christian in the world can't come to gather at the same place every week, right? But God has specifically given us local gatherings to have where every Sunday, probably at 10 a.m., just like everyone, you have thousands and thousands of people, millions of people gathering in the name of Jesus in different parts of the world, all coming together for that purpose of proclaiming him and being in that unity of the gospel. So I think that with that gives us like the who, but we also have our mission as well, like our purpose. That's where I went with scatter to proclaim his gospel. You have this like gather and scatter, which you've maybe heard before. I don't think I'm being unique in using those words, but this idea of scattering to proclaim his gospel is really the purpose of the church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I mentioned before, like every definition sort of has the same points. I think every church mission statement has the aspect of it's to know God and to make him known. Yeah. And I know a church locally that's literally know God and make him known is their mission statement. And like, well, that's like the simplest you possibly could say it, but it's effective is, like we gather to worship and we gather to reflect. And in a way, I think we've talked about this before, and you told me you don't think it's heresy, so I'm going to say it again, is I think when we're gathered, we give a truer image of who God is. Mm-hmm. Because we are, as individuals, we're the imago Dei, we're the image of God. We're made to reflect him, but as God himself is a community, as he's a triunity, three people or three persons, I guess, to use proper terminology, interacting, perfect unity, perfect community. As we come together and we're unified, we're giving a truer image of God, a truer representation of who he is and how he works and how he is love and what it means to say, well, God is love. It's like he can love himself, and it's not a selfish thing because he's community. And I think that gives us some message that helps us to proclaim who he is to the world more effectively when we're together.
Yeah, and you see that in Matthew 5, right? Jesus' Sermon on the Mount talks about being salt and being light, being a city set on a hill. And in verse 16, he says, "Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." So people are noticing it and they're seeing it. And out of that, they end up glorifying God, right? They glorify the Father who is in heaven because of what they see in the church, which is what we're supposed to be, the reflection of who God is to the world. I think of, 2 Corinthians as well, talking about us being given the ministry of reconciliation. We are given that ministry by Christ, who is the great reconciler, who reconciled us to the Father. And so he's now given us that ministry of reconciliation to go into all the world and make disciples, right? And that's our goal. We're reflecting God to others. Another one is be holy as I am holy, right? It's that attitude of this is my Father, this is my God, and I want to reflect him to others.
I think we've both mentioned before how there's times we'll be out doing our business, or even we both work at a cafe, so we'll see people come in, and there's something about when there's a group of believers that you'll be like, those people are Christians. Yeah. Like I can tell those are Christians. It's like the way that they carry themselves, the way they interact with each other, something about it. Whereas we'd hope as individuals, we're like, oh, I hope people can tell I'm a Christian because I'm so smiley and nice, or because I'm so passionate, or whatever your thing is. We hope that as individuals. But I don't think I've ever, other than like when I'm wearing a t-shirt that says it or something, I don't think I've ever had someone just be like, you must be a Christian. And I'm like, was it my halo? How did you know? Like, but there's times when you're out with groups where people are like, are you guys Christians? And you're like, yeah, totally. And it's cool how we can give off, like, I don't want to say give off an energy that sounds new agey, but it's like, it's more clear. Our identities are more clear when we're gathered. But
Well, there's even like, and that's what it should be, right? Like we should be able to, people should be able to look at us, how we're acting, what we're doing in attempting to glorify God in our works, and see something different, right? To see that we're being like intentional and wanting to bring others into a relationship with Christ as well. It should be obvious. So, I mean, I remember seeing a group at the park the other week, and both my wife, Brittany, and I, we were looking at them and like, I feel like that's a youth group right there. Because you had like these group of high school kids, and then a guy that totally looked like a youth pastor. But then you have like older people of like various ages, right? And it's like, what other kind of thing in society brings those types of people together? Like just people who are so different. It's the unity of the gospel that brings us together, right? I assume I'm going to say they were Christians. I'm going to assume that, but we never asked them. We let them enjoy their hot dogs and stuff.
It's like the only time adults willingly hang out with teenagers that aren't their family.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I just wanted to mention, you mentioned the passage, the ministry of reconciliation. And I love that idea and that verse of something that really motivates me. And we've seen it abused a lot. Maybe we can talk about that in another episode sometime, how people abuse that idea of what it means to have the ministry of reconciliation. But to me, that's so motivating to think like my goal is to help people get right with God. And especially when we think about like the true gospel, is that doesn't mean like I'm not a personal trainer. I'm not like I'm going to help you live holy, but we're really just telling people how easy it is, that they just have to have faith.
Yeah.
They just have to accept Christ's gift. But that, to me, when I think about the work of evangelism, I think about sharing, that makes it exciting to think about, like, I'm not trying to convert someone to my religion. I'm not trying to change someone's behavior, bring someone in. I'm just trying to help them reconcile to God. And I think about maybe it's just my personality, but I love when I can help two people. Like I'm a single guy, so I live with two roommates, and there have been times where like I'll come home and they're both arguing about dishes, and like I can help somehow, or maybe I'll just wash the dish and like
bring reconciliation.
But there's something where there's like you feel like that's like there's something fulfilling that brings you joy about reconciling, and like how much more to reconcile sinners with a loving God.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I think we've kind of talked through every section of it, right? The local church is a body of believers in Christ who regularly gather to worship God and to scatter, to proclaim his gospel to all people. And that's what we want to see, right? That ministry of reconciliation. We want to see others come to know Christ. That's the goal of the church. That's the mission of the church. Like you said, it's every church's mission is the same, to see sinners reconciled to a holy God. So you have anything else you want to add?
I think we've about covered it. I just really wanted to, I had it in my notes and I don't remember where I thought I was going to tie it in, but I just really love the definition that Peter gives us of who the church is, who the people of God are in 1 Peter chapter 2. And he says, "You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praise of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light." And that sort of, that ends again with, we've been called, our purpose is to declare his praise. But in that, I remember now why I had this in my notes. It says, you are a chosen people, God's special possession. I think we forget sometimes that the church was Jesus' idea. Like we think that people just invented this, that is some like man-made thing. And I was reading, Dawkins, A God Delusion, and he talks about how, the Christian faith in the church was invented by Paul, which, I mean, in itself is just bad history, because if you're going to attribute it to anyone, it should be Peter. But we often kind of think that way as Christians, but it really was Jesus' idea. It was Jesus who started it. And it's Jesus who said that he was going to build the church. And, you know, us as pastors and newly church planners, that's like our mantra, that Christ will build his church. That's what gives us confidence to keep going and to preach on Sundays where, you know, we're outside because of current, you know, pandemic restrictions and it's raining and only 3 people come. We trust that Christ will build his church.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, anything else?
I mean, I could go all day, but we should
close us off, Cody.
We'll wrap it up. Thank you guys for joining us. We hope that this was insightful or entertaining in some way. We're looking forward to doing more of these, maybe getting a little more comfortable on the mic. And if you have questions or thoughts, if you want to encourage us or tell us we're dumb or whatever, like, feel free.
We welcome all criticisms.
Yeah, post a comment if you're on YouTube. If you're listening in a podcast app, I don't know. We'll set up an email someday maybe. And,
look in the show notes.
But yeah, we look forward to doing more of this and just talking about Jesus with you.
And drinking more good coffee.
Always.